Hey everybody, Jim here, welcome back to Mad Panic Gaming, where today, since I recently made a video on the best Sega Genesis shooters, I thought it was only fair to make one on the best SNES shooters too. It's not a 16-bit console best known for its great shmups, that honor really goes to the Genesis and the PC Engine, but despite that fact, the SNES is home to some of my favorite shooters from this generation. Slow processor be damned, because the SNES library features some all-time shooting classics. So sit back, relax, and let's take a look at what I think are the absolute best. First up, we'll start with one of my personal favorite shooters ever, and that's Gradius 3 by Konami, which was a launch title for the SNES in North America. And as a launch title, it did a great job showing off what the SNES could do in terms of graphics, sound, and gameplay. It's true that there is a ton of slowdown in this game, but I have to say that after playing a modded version that removes the slowdown and playing the arcade version quite extensively, that slowdown is actually a lifesaver, because this is otherwise one brutal shooter. With that slowdown though, this is actually one of the more manageable shooters out there and a great place to start for beginners. You get a wide variety of power-ups to choose from, absolutely beautiful graphics by the standards of 1990, an amazing soundtrack, and most importantly, fun and reasonably challenging gameplay. There were a few Gradius games before this one and a few that came out after it, and I've played them all, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of this gameplay style, and the third game is still my favorite in the series. Gradius 3 represents the peak of Konami's 16-bit awesomeness. Actually, did I say that Gradius 3 is the peak of 16-bit Konami? Because I think a lot of people would argue that it's actually this game, Axelay from 1992. And it's easy to see why, because this game kicks some serious ass. First and foremost, this is a beautiful game that takes full advantage of the SNES hardware. In particular, the Mode 7 vertically scrolling stages are very striking. But the entire game features some very colorful and detailed stages, and some massive bosses to take on that all have some very cool designs. And as is typical of Konami around this time, Axelay has a pretty damn good soundtrack that really drives the action forward. That's all well and good, we all love a game that looks and sounds nice, but Axelay also has it where it really counts, and that's in the gameplay. It's a blend of both vertically and horizontally scrolling stages, which is nice for a bit of variety, and you've got a bunch of different weapon loadouts to choose from, with more weapons becoming available as you progress through the game. Also, it's not the fastest playing shooter ever made. It moves at a fairly leisurely pace most of the time, but doesn't suffer from nearly as much slowdown as Gradius 3, and most importantly, Axelay is a lot of fun. There are a few different difficulty levels to choose from, but overall this is a decently challenging game that I've played through numerous times and still come back to on a fairly regular basis. In short, this is a fantastic shooter, certainly a standout title on the SNES, and it's a game you should play immediately if you haven't already. Next up, the 1991 classic that is UN Squadron, aka Area 88, which is a port of the 1989 arcade game of the same name, but definitely does enough different from its arcade counterpart to set itself apart. You have 3 selectable characters to choose from that each start out with their own unique fighter jet, But as you complete missions and earn money, you can purchase a variety of new ships that each come with their own stats and weapon loadouts, which is in keeping with the original manga series as it focuses on a group of mercenary fighter pilots for hire. So there's quite a bit of variety in the ships you can use and the weapons available to you, which works well with the variety of missions you'll take on. Sometimes you'll be assaulting ground or seafaring targets, sometimes going on bombing runs, and sometimes taken to the skies for some aerial dogfights. So the weapons you choose to take with you are very important. UN Squadron is a fun and fairly challenging game with more variety than your average shoot-'em-up at the time. Plus, this is a pretty good looking game with colorful, detailed environments and again a wide variety of stages to play in. The soundtrack is kind of so-so in my opinion, with some tracks being really good and some just kind of being there, but taking everything into account, UN Squadron is definitely one of the best shooters on the SNES, and well worth your time if you're a fan of the genre. Next up, we've got a shooter that I find often gets overlooked, and that's probably because it's a port of a far superior Neo Geo game, but that is Aero Fighters from 1993. Developed by Video System, you might be more familiar with its alternate title, Sonic Wings, as this is a port of the first game in the series, which debuted in 1992. It is a stripped-down port of the Neo Geo game, offering you fewer ships to play as, and featuring significantly downgraded visuals and sound, but despite all of that, this is still a very well made and fun shooter. It was made as well as they could make it anyway, given the hardware limitations. If you've ever played a Psycho shooter such as Strikers 1945 or Gunbird, then you know what to expect here, as it's essentially the exact same gameplay style. Just annihilate everything in sight and grab those power-ups and or super bombs. Your starting power level is pretty weak, but with just a few power-ups, you become an absolute death machine. Colliding with enemies will only bring you down a power level, but getting hit by enemy fire will bring you back to square one. The gameplay is challenging, though there are a few difficulty levels to choose from, and this is a very fun shooter that I think deserves more praise than it typically gets. Sure, it doesn't hold a candle to the Neo Geo, but hey, few things can. Aero Fighters looks good, sounds good, and plays great. In short, it's awesome. Next up, we have Darius Twin from 1991. Developed and published by Taito, and this is a game that I think is all around solid, even if it's not exactly mind-blowing in any one department. Obviously, if given the chance, you'd rather play an arcade Darius game, or perhaps one of the later games in the series like G-Darius or Darius Gaiden, but looking back to 1991, this was pretty damn good. If you've ever played a Darius game, then you know what to expect here. Destroy lots of enemies, and collect power-ups to improve various aspects of your ship, including your primary and secondary weapons, your defensive shields, and there are also power-ups for extra lives and clearing the screen of enemies. And it just wouldn't be a Darius game without plenty of boss battles against spaceships in the form of various giant fish and crustaceans. It's all here just as you'd expect, and the gameplay is solid, fun, and presents a decent challenge. The visuals are also quite nice, with some especially detailed stages, and those big boss ships always look especially cool. And the sound design is pretty solid too. The only thing that really holds this game back, just like with Aero Fighters, is that it doesn't quite live up to its arcade counterparts in many departments. But when taken on its own merits, this is again an all-around solid shooter, and one that's well worth playing if you haven't already, but especially if you consider yourself a Darius fan. Next up, since I wanted to feature at least one Japan exclusive title, of which there are several, including the excellent Parodius series of games, I decided to go with Macross Scrambled Valkyrie from 1993. It was developed by Winkysoft, and as far as I know, it's the only shooter they ever worked on, but they definitely should have developed more because they did a damn fine job with this one. If you've never played it before, it's obviously based on the Macross series of manga and anime, and features 3 playable characters, each piloting their own unique ship. And each ship has 3 different forms: the fighter jet, the Gerwalk, and the Batoroid, each with its own separate weapons that can be powered up 3 times apiece. Instead of being taken out in a single hit, you have an energy bar that thankfully can be refilled with power-ups. At its core, Scrambled Valkyrie is just a fairly straightforward shooter. Just blast everything that appears on screen, collect score bonuses and power-ups, and destroy a boss at the end of each stage. What really puts this game over the top, though, is that it's just designed really well. It's fun and reasonably challenging, there's a bit of variety, and the license is used really well. Recognizable characters and ships, great visuals, and some solid sound design as well. It's really a shame that this one was never released outside of Japan, because as the title of the video states, this is for sure one of the best shooters on the console, and one that I recommend 110%. Next up, another absolute classic from 1993, and that's R-Type 3, The Third Lightning by Irem, and this is to date my favorite R-Type game and the one I've played the most over the years. With some of the other games in this video, I've mentioned that they're not nearly as good as their arcade counterparts, but here we have a game that has no arcade counterpart and was made specifically for the SNES. And I'd honestly much rather play this than the first couple of R-Type arcade games, and it's definitely a big improvement over Super R-Type. Here, unlike in the previous games, you actually have a choice of multiple different force balls to choose from, each with a different weapon loadout. Something that would carry on to later games in the series, and after you've made your choice, it's 100% balls to the wall, white knuckle action, and damn can this game kick your ass. R-Type games are generally known for their methodical pace and high difficulty, but this game feels like it was made by some real masochists. Tons of enemies and stage hazards, segments that require some sharp reflexes, and boss battles that'll definitely test your mettle. You've got access to plenty of firepower, including a supercharged shot that annihilates pretty much anything it touches, and trust me, you're going to need it. Amazing gameplay coupled with some truly outstanding visuals and sound design make R-Type one of my favorite 16-bit shooters. Last but certainly not least, we have what I think is overall the best shooter on the SNES, and that is 1992's Space Megaforce by Compile, or as it's known in Japan, Super Alesta, which puts it in the same company as some of Compile's other legendary shooters like Musha, Robo Alesta, and Blazing Lasers. In fact, if I had to compare Space Megaforce to just one game, Blazing Lasers would be it, because the two games have a lot in common. Vertically scrolling, high-intensity shooting action with a bunch of different weapon systems, 8 in total, each becoming more destructive with power-ups, and throw in some super bombs for good measure. This game is so much fun, and it presents a pretty decent challenge, especially when the screen is filling up with enemies and bullets, but the power-ups never stop coming, so you've got plenty of firepower to fall back on. And the game runs at a fairly brisk pace, which is surprising as the SNES isn't exactly the most accommodating console for shooters as a consequence, of having a relatively slow processor at the time, but Compile found a way because Space Megaforce runs about as well as you'd expect it to run on a PC Engine or Genesis, and all with some especially nice visuals and a pretty good soundtrack as well. Taking all of that into account, I can say again that I think this is the all-around best shooter on the SNES, and another one of my favorites from the 16-bit generation as a whole. If you've still never played Space Megaforce for some reason, rectify that immediately, because this game is all kinds of awesome. So there you go, everybody. Those are, in my opinion, the best shoot-'em-ups on the SNES. What did you think of the video? Did I leave any out that you believe should be counted among the best, or was I right on the money? And if I do another one of these, which I probably will, which console should I cover next? Thanks for watching Mad Bandit Gaming, and as always, stay awesome, everybody. Goodbye.